So, first of all, I want to thank Rodrigo and Emel in the organization of this workshop, which is very well organized and very with lots of interesting presentations. I will start making. I will make a presentation in two parts. One first part is something which the first part is mainly about one problem raised by yesterday by Olgiati, and it's about the social function of architecture. I ask you for a bit of patience for hearing what I have to say about this, and then I will present some work. And the work I will present is mainly organized on two parts. One is mainly a rural, work done in architectural in rural areas, and the other three works are mainly in urban situations. So. For this first part about social function of architecture, I wrote a small text that I will read. I apologize for this. I don't like, in general, to read text because it's a bit boring for who is hearing. But for being more accurate, I need to read it. So, and the text is mainly about two tapestries by Erik Gunnar Asplund. There is a recent tendency in society to over-evaluate the architectural author. We can see this in the self-promotion of guys like Rem Koolhaas or Zaha Hadid, just to say two examples. But curiously, this tendency, which is, in fact has economic outcomes, meaning that someone is taking huge profits from this over-evaluation, have been creating a paradoxical rejection of or on authorship in architecture. So there is a kind of reaction to the activity of architecture, in part due to the before mentioned over-evaluation of iconic architectures and architects as icons, I mean images which we have to worship. Among many reactions against this, the authorship in architecture, we can take the examples of the recent Triennale of Architecture in Lisbon. The curator, I suppose a woman from abroad, I think she was from Australia or something, gave an interview against the established architects, white-hair professionals, she said, and getting support from small group of social activists. But curiously, the activities promoted by the Biennale as architects cooking or doing heritage visits or whatever, could be resumed to postpone the specific contribution that architects may have in society, which is to draw a better place where to live. So this was another paradox. As El País, the famous Spanish journal, commented on the Lisbon Triennale, that all the architectural activism resulted in postponement of architecture. So, thinking about the problem of architectural star system just mentioned, we can think about three reasons for the losing of authorship in architecture. The first one is the dilution of the architect as author in a commercial brand dedicated to design services, in part due to the complexity and financial support needed in order to have huge commitments. Another is the dilution of the architect as author by the inclusion of activities in unexplored fields which do not deal with structuring the physical space where humans used to live. Another reason is the incorporation of new design project methodologies that include participatory interventions, deleting the social and cultural responsibility of architects in the production of architecture. There is also a radicalization of architectural discourse based on the idea of architectural autonomy, which pushes architects' role to the production of drawings, which have not a role in mediating the physical space construction. The question that looks like underlying these considerations in the first approach is the social role of architecture, and also the social role of architects as professionals of architecture. But thinking that architecture as an activity that produces objects that have an intention of transformation of the world, and in order to produce those objects, architecture needs future users, and therefore those transformation processes need common codes between the many participants in their production. There is a need for clarifying what do architects understand as participated practice in the production of objects. This reflection may allow understanding a possible solution for the mentioned paradox and pointing pathways to the study of social production of architecture and also its knowledge production. I'm not used to talk about decoration. In fact, I do prefer architecture as infrastructure, and I praise everything that in architectural design is structuring architecture. But in this case, what occurs to me is precisely what could be called decoration, or that surplus in architecture that is not structuring the architectural idea of design. So my reflection takes for its center two tapestries designed by Erik Gunnar Asplund, a Swedish architect that died in 1940. Those tapestries are included in two of his most praised buildings, the Gothenburg Law Courts and the Holy Cross Chapel at South Stockholm Cemetery, both buildings in Sweden, but in opposite towns, as you may know. So I'm suggesting a reflection on two tapestries, which in fact have a very diverse purpose and meaning. The first one is in fact a textile tapestry, but its function is not to cover the floor. In fact, it was thought as a tapestry to be hung in a wall. As about second, it is a tapestry to cover the floor, but it is not textile. In fact, it is carved in a slab stone. So it is not a common tapestry by carved one, a tapestry that is impossible to move out from the floor. So it is a kind of tapestry that is done forever. We could think that these two tapestries are a kind of accidents or things which are not essential when we think about the architectural works in which they are included. But my argument is precisely the opposite, that these tapestries not only explain the architecture in which they are included, but also they resume the architectural intentions of the author, Gunnar Asplund, mainly what was his opinion about the social function of the architectural profession in architecture. Furthermore, there are drawings that illustrate the specific intentions Asplund has on drawing these tapestries, and he did those designs as he did all other aspects of the respective buildings with same care, time, and so on. The Gothenburg Law Court was a competition won by Asplund in 1913, but the final version of design of the building was only accomplished in 1935, when the building starts to be built. It was finished in 1937, 2 years after. So when we think that Asplund died in 1940, we can say that this design project was done practically along all his life. In fact, there are revisions and design proposals along the 25 years that occur until its completion. The tapestry is thought as a kind of signature of the building, is what you see here. This means that in the tapestry are represented the many participants in programming, thinking, building, and commenting the building. And therefore, as tapestry is located in the interior of the building, the tapestry appears as an element which identifies the authorship of the building, as a kind of collective signature, although being thought and designed by the architectural author. I mean Asplund himself. The tapestry was fabricated by Else Gullberg, a famous textile and tapestries producer from Sweden with a strong modernist education, to whom Asplund committed or endorsed commitment of 3 tapestries for the law courts, including this one. The tapestries have circa 30 initials or signatures, as you see here, of various participants, organized by 3 main groups with respective signs, as Claes Kaldenby, a Swedish critic, says. In superior right corner, here, are the politicians and high-range staff from the law court. And the sign is Judge Hammer, as you see here. The Judge Bernhard Lindberg was a central figure in the project, keeping permanent correspondence with Asplund. Axel Dahlström, a social democrat political leader of Gothenburg, was responsible of the financial department at the municipality. So, in the right inferior corner, near this instrument, which I don't know the name in English, and this other instrument of building, are the initials of All Enquist. Sorry, okay, I think it's the general contractor was his main collaborators, managers, and subcontractors. Enquist was a builder socially engaged and politically influent in business starting in the 20s until he said in 1969. In the left inferior corner are the project designers in the design consultancies here. In the top there is Erik Gunnar Asplund, EGA, within 4 of his associates symbolized by an eye. As a symbol of an architect, the eye is not completely self-evident, as Judge Hammer or this field, I don't know the name in English, of this thing here, you know, this. In fact, of the preparatory drawings for tapestry shows the symbol close to Asplund capitals by the T-square and the curve rule. Below Asplund is the water pipes engineer Hugo Theorel. Here. The H is composed by water pipes, and T is also a kind of water pipe. With the same humor, the capital letters of the name of the electric engineer, Carl Eliasson, are accompanied by a ray. So this is the engineer, electrical engineer. 2 local newspapers figure as well in the tapestry, the Göteborgs Morgenpost and the Göteborgs Handels- och Sjöfartstidning. Sorry, these are the initials of 2 Gothenburg newspapers. The initials of these newspapers have arrows pointed to the name of Asplund. Here. In fact, after completion of the building, when the scaffolds were removed, those newspapers published very strong critics against Asplund and the building. In the first week of October of 1936, the headlines of those newspapers were, "The biggest tragedy that occurred in Gothenburg was this building, law courts. A catastrophe, horrible." So the inscription of initials in the execution of buildings have a strong besides this, he included, of course, these critics in his own authorship tapestry. The inscription of initials in the execution of buildings have a strong tradition that goes back until the Middle Ages, when stonemasons used to sign the stones they applied in buildings. Some authors say that these signatures or marks allow it, in the end of the day, to count the number of stones that each mason had done and paid properly. Although some other authors say that there are many stones in those buildings that are not signed, and the only stones that were signed were stones that would appear to be to the observer, and therefore giving more importance to those stones instead of those that were not be shown. Anyway, the question is that for someone who sees these buildings, the signed stones are a symbol of the collective quality of the work, a demonstration of the role each participant has on the whole, which appears in the finished work. But Asplund does not pretend to take a medieval tradition back. His intention looks like to map the participation processes in the building, particularly the role that the commitment, designer and contractor have in the wall. But what is curious is that also the critical participation, as newspaper articles, have a specific role in the building construction. On another hand, we can think that tapestry as a textile is a metaphor of the building construction and makes you think that the building is a result in which only in the end we can see what we are building, as it happens in the textile, because only when tapestry is finished can we see the result through a process of reversing it. Only then it becomes visible. The second tapestry is a bit more difficult to explain. At about more or less the same time period of building the Gothenburg Law Courts, Asplund was also designing the Holy Cross Chapel at South Stockholm Cemetery, a competition that he with Sigurd Leverentz won in 1915. Asplund had previously built the chapel in the woods between 1918 and 1920. But in that time, Asplund was yet an architect of romantic education. In fact, with project design of 1930s Great Exhibition of Stockholm, Asplund approached the architectural functionalism, although always with a specific reading on functionalism, very distinct from the clockmaker functionalism of Le Corbusier, just to give an example. The space of the chapel is organized through a leveled round pathway leveled with main entrance, and that has a role of it works like a deambulatorium, as happens, for instance, in pilgrimage churches. The deambulatorium means a space that you would walk and is continuous behind the main altar. In the center of the chapel is located the space for the participants in the ceremony, and with a very light descent in the middle is located the space where the coffin should be, here. This element allows the disappearance of the coffin after the ceremony, because it has a kind of lift or elevator and it goes down. Near the space where the coffin will be, there are seats for the participants that are closer to the defunct person, normally the relatives, which are here. But main problem Asplund raises with this chapel is precisely how can architecture turn lighter the pain suffered by losing of someone who was loved by somebody else, by a relative, for instance. And in spite of the frescoes in the walls of the chapel, which are located here in this back wall, so in spite of the frescoes in the walls, which show the resurrection, the problem still persists in the mind of Asplund, mainly for those which the sentiment of loss is most devastating. And solution Asplund's point is to design a tapestry in the floor. The tapestry is carved in the stone through some lines that simulate the various layers of the textile. So you see here the carved tapestry. The design only pretends to give an answer friendly and cherished to the looking of someone who searches something where to fix his gaze in such a painful moment, as Hacking says. That's an experience we all have, the one of the deepest sorrow, in which our eyes look for something to fix, just not for looking. The function of design project, in this case, is not anymore to respond to functional needs, but instead to allow the mourning of the feelings for the lost. So we all have this experience of deep sorrow for having lost someone, somebody, and how to look at something it's a kind of something painful. So a weight becomes looking for someone looks wait for ourselves. So in this case, drawing is not just answering the primary function needs that humans have, but a kind of support for mourning, the manifestation of a feeling of loss. So we can think about another social function for architecture, in which drawing doesn't correspond anymore to functional needs, for which architects used to be trained, but to other needs, those needs which allow to support life in a lighter way, mainly in moments where everything looks like to collapse. This other function for architecture, or this social function for architecture, could be included in drawing or not drawing, or just leaving space to the other, to the user, to somebody else. So this could be also to draw an absence, in a way, an absent object, as in a way the drawing of this tapestry by Asplund is. So this is the end of the first part about two tapestries by Gunnar Asplund and a kind of answer to the problem of social function of architecture, at least from my point of view. And now I'm going to show some work I've done in the last maybe 20 years. And first work is curiously an extension of the small church. It's a church near Braga. It is located in a very rural area, and you can see here that it is in a high point. It's a kind of hill. And the previous church was a two-nave church. A two-nave church which has a kind of Gothic origin, and then it was in the 18th century. There was a new facade. It was, built, and the new facade just accentuates this duality of the interior of two naves. Of course, for the Christian world, there are no churches of two naves. It's a kind of strange thing, because as the church is a representation of the heaven on earth, and so it's a kind of Jerusalem, and so because of that, it should always reinforce unity, and the only way to reinforce unity in a space is just to have one nave or three naves. Otherwise, you have a kind of dual thing, which is really strange for the Christian world. So the priest wanted to he asked me for an extension of the church, and we thought that we could try to reinforcing the main nave to create a new nave for the baptism. So this is the general plan already with the new part, with the extension. And the extension side, which is here to the right side, just take precisely the same measures as the ancient left nave. And mainly, there were lots of problems. One problem is that we wanted that this extension should be removed if they wanted to. In a way, it should be done in a way that could be then demolished, for instance. Another aspect was that there was a huge structure of spaces which were running parallel to the facade, which included a tower and a choir, high choir. So we started to draw a new entrance for this new nave, which should also connect the other elements. And finally, the nave, here there was a special space for the Holy Christ, and so here we created the baptism shell. So you can see here in the section the new structure, including the baptism point. Another problem was that the light of the interior of this church in this side was very, very low. It has not big lights. And so there was a huge difficulty on drawing windows. So we thought that we could, because there was already this kind of structure here, to bring a very high window that would bring light from the upper part and would give light to this facade in a way that would allow people to realize that this side was an extension, something new, and the light would not, keep the new light would not, subvert the light values of the previous church. So these are some sections and detailing of and construction elements. The covering is made of wood. This is this element is made of Gothic, but the new element here, as you see, it's a kind of Renaissance element. Is made of granite. Has a new language. So there is a kind of continuity from a building, a constructional perspective, that these Gothic elements corresponded to these Renaissance language elements. So we thought that we could include that the window I show it first. It could be also included in this logic of keeping the point where the roof connects the wall. Could include the new elements or the new language elements, and that's precisely what you see here. You see the capitals, the former capitals, and you see the new element which is made of steel and so on. And has, for instance, this is one side, and in the other side it was fulfilled with this stone which allows light to go through. So in a way, when you see the structure without light in the interior, you just see a stone, and but in spite of that, the interior has a kind of very soft light. So this is the interior and the baptism shell, a detail, an image from the other side, the main entrance space and the exterior, and you see the extension which keeps a bit, it's a bit like a ruin in a way. It's incomplete. It's a door like that door here, has the same proportions, same dimensions, but it has no pilasters, no other elements. In a way, it was as if a kind of autonomous door that allows you to get inside, but the volume is just, in a way, it is suggested. It's not fully completed. The pavement, And finally, from another approach, you see lots of vertical elements, which is the tower and the chimney, and also the baptism element, which is included in this structure. So, as you see, this is a kind of interpretation of a specific context, cultural context. But in that case, the function is still the same because the church still exists. There are still priests and people who go to church, so it has the same function. It was, but when we think about the rural house, this is the case. Everything works in a very diverse way because what is to be the way people lived in these kind of houses in the 16th, 17th century, the notions of comfort, for instance, were completely different from nowadays. And also the function of the house, because these houses were productive buildings, were not something for holidays. So when we think about getting a house like this and making and transforming it in something for having holidays, in our notions of comfort and privacy, it's really difficult because everything is upside down, so everything is transformed. And I would say, for instance, the house has this structure here, but it has two floors, it is a two-floor house, but it has no exterior space in a way, no balcony, no. So one main problem we were facing was to make a balcony for the house. Another problem was the kitchen, how to draw a kitchen. Another problem was how to connect both floors, because these kind of houses, they had no connection between floors. People used to go outside to get to the ground floor because ground floor was mainly for rural activities. So we introduced, in a way, the kitchen in this very long element and a very, very narrow stair leading to the ground floor. The other thing, so this is the living room, the balcony, 2 rooms with a bathroom, and in the ground floor you have working space for writing. There are teachers, there are professors, and another room for sleeping, another sleeping room with a bathroom, and here a kind of space without any specific function, which gives access to this very narrow street, very narrow stair which goes upstairs. Here you have the new facade, so the balcony and a new window. And just to, in order to do the stair, we just did the stair in a way that it is incorporated in the wall. So it's a very huge stone elements which in fact are carved, and they make the stair. So you can see here the stones which are carved and have the stair inside. So this is the exterior, the main access, and then you see a bit of the balcony. An image from the other side with the balcony. You see that this volume is very close, it has just very narrow windows. The balcony from the top, some light, some aspects. And interior, we just painted everything white. These walls were made of wood as traditionally used to be made. The main window, which was open, it was new, the ground floor, and this space without any function, which is between 2 walls. And to this right side, you can see the new stone wall, which has this very long and narrow stair going up to the kitchen area. So Another point about this kind of rural structures is precisely one problem is that when we think about productivity in rural areas, there is a kind of industrialization of rural processes. So it is very difficult to keep traditional activities in these new contexts because the rules for having rural production are really demanding. We have these European Euro codes and Euro things. And the problem is that traditional rural landscapes, they were organized since the Roman times mainly in three areas. The upper part, which was the pine area, which was called in silva, which means bushes or forests. The middle area, which is precisely the place where oaks used to be, oaks and this kind of trees which give shadow, and the water comes from the upper parts and is preserved in these middle areas. And then you have the fields, the productive fields. So you have these three areas which are very distinct from the point of view of the trees and water and so on. So the water, for instance, is kept here just to irrigate the fields in a way. So you have a kind of landscape economy of these structures. So and the problem is that this point here is where houses used to be, housing and the farm buildings. As you see here, this from to this side is the silva, and to this side it's the fields. So this project is mainly for the refurbishment of one house, which is this one, this house, and the interior of the house. The process of refurbishment is, this project was not built, it was just drawn, and it is mainly made of structural plywood, and this would be the interior patio of the house. And what I want to show really is this cowshed. It's the cowshed of this farm, which is located precisely in this point between the silva area and the fields. So, and the problem of cowshed is that a cowshed should have 14 meters span. It should be a very wide span, and the cowshed should be a very huge structure, very long structure, 100 meters long. So it's something like this. You know, it has. Or maybe 70 meters long, something. It has maybe 1,000 square meters or something like that. So we were thinking that we could bring a granite wall, as those walls which formerly structured the area, and then to make a cowshed of plywood that would cover this in a very economic way that would allow to overcome these 14 meters. And it is 14 meters because you have an area here for feeding the animals, and you have the animals here, and then here you have the space for giving out milk, and there's a milk element here, and the water closets, and this is the maternity where the cows have their babies. And so the covering of the structure is made, so the idea was to have this kind of very huge triangles of 1 meter high and 14 meters long, 1 meter 40 high and 14 meters long, which connected in a way. They would allow to have a very light structure made of plywood. So I will explain a bit how it is made. It's a kind of harmonic thing. It is like having triangles made of this plywood, which is 40 centimeters thick. It's not so thick. If you imagine they have 14 meters, they are 40 meters long. So we have these two triangles which are connected, and then they create a kind of gutter, a natural gutter, and then you have another element from the other side and another gutter. So finally you have this structure which is geometrically self-supportive. And so from one side, this wood structure would be supported in this stone wall, and in the other side in a concrete wall, allowing light coming from south side. So that's the image. You can see here, this is the place for the cows, the north side, south side, concrete wall, and kind of wood, and this plywood elements, which are structural plywood. And from the fields, the image you would have would be something like this, a very, kind of abstract structure made of wood. So I'm going to show now three projects made in urban settlements, in urban situations. So the first one is something, it's a laundry, it's a public laundry, and it is in São Nicolau in Porto. So this structure, in that time when this building was built in beginning of 1919, so maybe 20 years ago or something like that, in that time there were people at home, there were a lack of showers and laundry. They didn't have laundries at home or machines for laundry. Nowadays they have already, but they still keep using this facility. And the idea in that time, Ribeira, which is the area, is Rio Douro, so it's the core of the town, near the riverside. It has already a huge touristic pressure. There was a very strong touristic pressure over the area. So there was a problem of lacking a space, still some common spaces of traditional users of that area. And so we thought that we could draw a building that would in a way incorporate the urban structure, these narrow streets and these narrow pathways and narrow structures, a kind of labyrinth that would people of the area would know very well, and people from abroad would not come into, or would not come so easily into. So, and the structure is a bit a kind of a corridor, or which is in fact thought as a kind of street. For us, it was a bit like digging an archaeological site and finding former streets or former spaces, because it was a platform and we had to dig everything. So we were thinking about having an entrance in a point and getting down in a successive way until we would reach a huge space with a very, very huge skylight would bring light to these washing spaces or washing tanks. So, and also people would, for instance, these are the public bathrooms. So people who want to come to a bathroom would come to this point, or mechanic washing here. But then people who wanted to have a shower would go in a more private way here, or to wash the clothes in an even more private way to the final space. These are the sections, and in these sections you can see that the height of the spaces are increasing in height. And also, an aspect which is very important for us is that this corridor here would have a kind of ambiguous situation. It should allow to have the impression that this space here would be a kind of exterior space. So it has this kind of ambiguous quality of being in a corridor, which is an interior space, and you look outside to another space which is also interior, but because it has such a huge amount of light, would be perceived as an exterior space. So the building is made of concrete in a very rough way, and the detailings are just about some black slate pavements or, stainless steel railways or stainless steel elements, for instance, in the shower space, we don't have mirrors made of glass, but instead stainless steel plates just polished in order to not to break, because this should be very robust and should be kept after many years and so on. So this is it. This is the laundry. That context, as you saw, we didn't saw it, but it's a very dense and historical context. This other project, which is works in a very diverse context. It is a suburbia context. There are no architectural references. In fact, it was an area. There was a highway who were going to be built, and so everything was in a huge process of transformation. So we didn't have any urban support for doing such a building, which was a convent. So our first approach was that we should make this building as a city for itself, as an autonomous city, as an autonomous town, as something that would exist for itself. And the idea of the convent as a small town, it's a very old idea, as you imagine. And in fact, we organized this as the cultural part of the building, the part for living the monks, and the church. And this would be built by parts. There were elements which were linking together the church with this living part in the cultural center, and this element would bring people to the main road access. Besides this, the idea of having access from the north side of the building would allow to identify through these different volumes, different parts of that convent, or different functions of the convent. As you can see also in this model, church, the living part, and the cultural center, which is characterized by a huge cylinder, which is in fact library. Some plans, sections, and some images. The element which connects everything, the church, which is made of concrete. The cultural part was not built, the interior cloister, and the access to the upper level of the cloister, the main entrance space, which has very small, very narrow windows, and the church with a very huge skylight, which allows light which leads the wall, the concrete wall. Okay. And now finally, in a complete different situation, which is a very stabilized urban situation, I'm going to show a project which is a healthcare center. in Vila do Conde, which is nearby Porto. It's 50 kilometers north of Porto. It's a seaside town. And the problem of this project was there is a problem in general about this kind of health facilities, which is, in general, you have an access to a point, and then you have corridors which connect you to a place where you stand waiting for a doctor. And these places in general are, segregated from the urban space. And the main purpose of this project, for me at least, was to bring a very huge waiting area and very clearly connected with the urban surrounding space, in a way that people could go out and in and out in an easy way, as if to go to a healthcare center would be something absolutely normal and for the everyday, because the function is a bit like that. The building, as this kind of building or this kind of program is very repetitive. You have these doctors' cells, these doctors' rooms where they give consult. People go there to have consultancy. These are the waiting areas and so on. So the idea was just to build this with the prefabricated concrete elements, which would allow just to pile elements one over the other, and each element of this would be connected with next one through two elements, one door and one window, and these elements would connect everything. So we could resume the construction of the building to these concrete elements, to these concrete walls. As you see here in this detailing, this is the concrete element, the window, and another concrete element which just closes the structure and allows some insulation. So this is a bit of the building. These huge glass elements which were fulfilling the concrete structure in a way that you should have a kind of tense box, a tension which comes from the tension of material, the tension of concrete and glass and surface and glass, which makes a kind of very thin surface. And that's what you see here, a bit, this absolute continuity of surfacing things. This is north side in a way, so it is not, we do not need to protect it from the sun and so on, but from the south side, which has all these small cells, you have these very thin vertical elements which have to do with the doctor's cells. And so in the evening, when the light is in the interior, you can see there is a kind of transparency reversed. You can see the interior from the exterior. So some images of the interior, precisely this notion that from the interior you can see the exterior also. You have this huge continuity. And the upper concrete element, which allows light to reflect and brings this corridor, which is a kind of service corridor, to belong to the waiting areas. And that's all. Thank you.